So a few years ago, I went back to school to study applied positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And the number one question that I got from many of my colleagues in the spa industry was, "Oh, are you leaving the spa industry?" And I think that's a really interesting question when you consider that we define ourselves as places that enhance well-being across body, mind, and spirit. But we don't seem to think about the study of mental well-being as being a part of what we do. And I think as I look around the industry and I see the way that we tend to market ourselves around facilities, treatments, the ingredients in our products, that I have to come to the conclusion that even in the spa industry, even in the ethereal, holistic, airy-fairy, foo-foo-la-la spa world, we focus predominantly on the physical. And we don't spend as much time as we should thinking about the psychological impact of what we do. Now, I can kind of understand why we haven't turned to psychology, because psychology for most of the last 50 to 100 years has been very negative. So if Sigmund Freud were here with us today, he would look out at all of us and think most of us deep inside are pretty dark and twisted. We have all kinds of problems in our head that stem from early childhood, and the only way we'll ever overcome them is through extensive psychotherapy. So Marty Seligmann in 1998 was the president of the American Psychological Association. And he felt that somewhere along the way, psychology had forgotten its mission, which was supposed to be to help people live better lives. But somehow we had forgotten that. And after World War II, we got exclusively in the business of fixing people that were broken. So he proposed a new field of psychology that would be based on the positive side of life, positive psychology, and that it would focus not on what's wrong with people, but what is right with people, and not on what are the things that we want less of out of life, but what do we want more of out of life? Positive emotions, engagement, relationships, a sense of purpose or meaning, accomplishment, all of these things that contribute to a flourishing life. So over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of new research coming out, including the research on willpower, that helps us understand much better how to live the good life. And for the first time, when you go into the self-help section, most of these books are written by researchers, and they're based on randomized controlled trial experiments. So we're really scientifically trying to understand what happiness is and what it means to us. Now, I would say the happiness stock has gone up and down throughout the course of the last 3 days. I always hesitate a little bit to get up in front of an audience of professional, scientifically minded people and talk about happiness, because happiness tends to have a bad reputation. It's very shallow, it's superficial, it's somewhat hedonistic. And I think we wrestle with this in the spa industry. We wrestle with our own pampering identity. And, you know, is this what we stand for in the spa, is only making people feel good? And so we've tried to shy away from this, and we try to focus more on wellness rather than pampering or feeling good. But the interesting thing is that there are some real serious beneficial outcomes that are tied to happiness. So happy people have better relationships, they have better marriages, they use their minds more creatively, they're better leaders, they're more successful at work, they earn more money, and they're healthier. They have better physical health, and they have better mental health. So there's something about feeling good and being well which is really tied together. And I think that's something we should pay attention to. One of the researchers, just an example of one study that has been done linking health and happiness is this study that looked at the baseball cards of professional baseball players from 1952. And it turns out that the smiles on the faces of the baseball players could predict their longevity in 2009, 60 years later. And there's tons of research like that. So one of the researchers who has done a lot of work on positive emotions is Barbara Fredrickson. And Martin Seligmann refers to Barbara Fredrickson as the genius of positive psychology for her broaden and build theory of positive emotions. We've known for a long time the purpose of negative emotions. Negative emotions help us to confront a problem. You are confronting an enemy, you feel anger, and you're prepared to fight. You confront a threat, you feel fear, you're prepared to flee. But why do we feel good? Why do positive emotions help us? Why has that evolved? And Barbara Fredrickson's research shows that while negative emotions narrow us in to focus on a problem, positive emotions open our horizons. They open our hearts and minds, and we notice things around us that we wouldn't otherwise notice. We become open to more possibilities, and that openness leads us to learn and grow and develop resources that help us in our lives. So just to give you some examples of how this ties into wellness and health, one way is through relationships. So when we're in a positive state, we're more open to other people, we see similarities that we share with other people more readily, and we're more likely to build friendships and a social network. And there's all kinds of research linking having that social support network to our health. George Valiant, who's the author of Aging Well and Spiritual Evolution, has done research through Harvard, and he says, if you ask people the question, who can you call at 2 o'clock in the morning if you need someone? You can predict someone's health with that question. The other way is positive health behaviors. So when we're in a positive state and we're feeling good, we're more likely to want to get out and pursue positive activity. You're in a negative mood, what do you want to do? You want to maybe eat ice cream, drink alcohol, watch reruns of Jersey Shore. We don't get very creative when we're not in a good mood. But when you are in a good mood, suddenly you want to get out and see the world. You want to go outside and play. You want to connect with friends. And you want to pursue your goals because you're more open to the big picture of your life and what those goals mean to you. And then finally, there's all kinds of research linking biological markers of health with positive emotions. So happier people tend to have better cardiovascular functioning, better immune functioning, and longer telomeres, and better response to stress. So everybody in the room knows the negative impacts of stress on health, but positive emotions act as a shield, buffering us from stress. So when we're in a positive state, our stress system reacts less often, we adapt to stressors more quickly, and when our stress system does react, it goes back down to normal and gets back down to baseline more quickly. So I think there's two takeaways that I have for the spa industry on this. The first is that I think we need to get inside our customers' heads. We need to think about the definition that we have put on ourselves, that we're offering body, mind, and spirit well-being. So we need to really think about the mental and spiritual side of that. And what we do, the spa experience is not really about, in my opinion, facilities, treatments, and products. It's really, at the end of the day, about how did we make our customers feel. And I think the good news for the spa industry is we make our customers feel really good. And that is our strength. So when we get together and we talk about wellness, I've heard over the last few days a lot of talk about being more scientific, about focusing on health, about being evidence-based, about using technology. I think those are all great ideas, and we need to continue working on that. We need to get better at all of those things. But there's a lot of other healing institutions that are doing that already, and they're doing it much better than we do. What we do really well is provide healing that feels good. Because there's no other healing institution that people look forward to going to, that people enjoy when they're there, and that people remember fondly afterwards the way they do spa. So I think as we're focusing on wellness, we should stay close to that core strength that we have, which is wellness that feels good. Thank you.
Okay. Jeremy, if you would stay.
Do you want to put chairs out?
Huh?
Do you want to put chairs out?
No, we're going to stand. We're going to be lively. Okay. You ready for this? Okay, I'm going to ask the first question here. I want to know what comes first in the chicken and egg sense. I want to know, is it willpower or is it happiness? How they have to interact, okay? Because when I'm happy, I've got way more willpower. So can you explain or take it away?
So there's no quick which comes first, but there is evidence that happiness negates the effects of self-control. So in some studies, they come in and the effect of depletion. So they'll give someone a self-control task, and then they'll come in and they'll give them like a little present, and then they'll measure their self-control again, and they don't show the depletion effect. So that's one way I think happiness definitely improves self-control, and there's evidence for it.
Yeah, I think, is this on? Yeah, I think the other thing I would say, and Jessica touched on this in her presentation, but I think mindfulness is kind of the intersection of those two things. So the last 10 years, I think mental health has really focused on happiness. I mean, you saw all the books. That's been the huge trend. I think the next 10 years, the focus will be mindfulness. And so it's not, kind of like Andrew Weil said, it's not about single-mindedly pursuing happiness. It's really about understanding your emotions and being able to use them to your advantage. The research that I talked about with Barbara Fredrickson, she's found that there's a ratio of 3 positive emotions to 1 negative emotion that's important for flourishing. So what I think is interesting about that is it's not 3 to 0. It's not like we want to be happy all the time, because you get important information about the world from your negative emotions and about what's going on inside you and things that are going on around you. So mindfulness is kind of being able to globally look at all of that. And like Jessica touched on in her presentation, it's also that shifting of attention and being able to have the self-control to focus your attention on what makes sense based on what's most meaningful to you.
And I remember in some of our discussions, Jeremy, you talking about 2 levels of happiness. So could you talk about that a little bit? 2 levels, because I'm really interested in that. I want to be happy on both levels, but go for it.
I think this is the problem with the word happiness, and why we've heard different opinions about happiness, is that we use the word happiness all the time, but it means different things. Sometimes we use it to mean pleasure, like how we feel if we eat ice cream or have sex or do something that feels really good. But we also use it to mean, someone who's just generally in a good mood all the time, or, seems to have a bubbly personality. So it's more of a stable personality trait. And we also use it to mean, how do we feel about our life in general? Do we feel like we have fulfilled our mission in life? And so, I kind of describe it like there's the shallow end of the pool of happiness, which is more the superficial pleasure. But there's also that deep side of happiness, which is, on your deathbed, as you look back, would you feel happy about what you had accomplished and the life that you had lived? So there's both levels of that.
There's a balance. And so, Jessica, would willpower fit into both of those, or maybe the longer range kind of happiness?
Willpower, I think, really almost only fits into the long range view of it. There's some evidence that if people are primed to prioritize happiness, so if you set that as their goal, whatever you do, stay happy right now, people will do all kinds of bad things for themselves and will do nothing that is good for them. Because a lot of the things that are good for us maybe don't feel good in the moment, but feel good in that long range way. So happiness is really important. But maybe putting a lot of priority on that happiness as an individual can lead people maybe a little bit astray, as far as if they're not willing to occasionally step out of that shallow end, they're never going to get to that deep end.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way I see mindfulness is when you come to a fork in the, or the way I see willpower, but it also ties into mindfulness, is when you come to a fork in the road and you have to choose between that in the moment happiness or that other fork that goes to something more meaningful and perhaps long-term fulfillment, the willpower is what's going to make you go down the right fork. And if you don't have the willpower, then you're easily distracted by the momentary pleasure of short-term happiness.
I think as we heard the people talk about life coaching and behavior change and so on and so forth, I think one of the things that strikes me is health is a journey. It's a long-term thing. So when you're coaching people, or when you have people at your spa, or when you have people who come to you and say, I've tried to lose weight or I've tried to do whatever, we've just learned that dieting doesn't work. We've just learned there's a lot of things that really need to go into the long term. So I think the question to both of you is, how do we convince people that in the long term it really works? Because we're kind of wired for short-term pleasure, short-term results. And so when we read these ads about, oh, you can lose 22 pounds in 3 days if you just drink my fancy detox junk, okay? Sorry. Anyway, so how on earth do we get people around that so that they can see the long range?
actually think that maybe one of the best strategies is to set the goals more short term. I think that's something that people struggle with a lot, where there's this dichotomy between healthy and unhealthy people, and you either have to be doing everything right or you're doing everything wrong. And I think if there could be more of an emphasis on the short term, let people focus on the short term, but say, next week I'd like you to eat a vegetable a day, and let people set these very manageable short-term goals. Because I think it's really hard for people to look long-term. It's fascinating that we're even able to imagine ourselves 50 years in the future. As far as we know, no other animal does that. And so I think it might be better to make our goals more in line with the way we think than try to maybe push our thinking too far in the future.
So that's probably something we really need to think about when we have guests at our spa and we're trying to urge them to move forward too quickly. And the sustainability of it, then you think sustainability of whatever they're doing to become healthier probably has to be in short steps. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, that would be my inclination.
So what would you say when people come to a destination and they come with a goal? So what would you advise us, and I'm sorry to do this to you, but what would you advise us in this industry, how to encourage them to do that in a good way? Because they all want to come to us at the end of the week and say, I didn't lose my 22 pounds, so you failed, you know. So how would you handle that?
I would do your best to discourage people from setting unreasonable goals. There's I forget his name, but there's a bookie that bets against people who go on diets. He lets them set the parameters. So they say, this is how much I'm going to lose, and this is how long I'm going to lose it, when I'm going to lose it by. And he bets against them, and he wins 80% of the time. So people,
That's a good business model.
I think it's probably not good for health, but it really illustrates the point. People set unreasonable goals, and if you as wellness providers can guide them toward, understanding the limits of their body and understanding what will actually be sustainable and what will actually be good for them in the long term, I think that would go a long way. Obviously, you can't convince everyone, but it would make a big difference.
I think I come at this from a little different perspective because I work in the hotel spa side of the business. So I have to keep my feet grounded in reality, and we don't have people coming into my spas that are doing, week-long programs or trying to transform their health when they come into a spa. So I think the way that I think about it is, what's the smallest thing that we can do in a 60-minute window that's going to have the biggest impact on someone? And so that's why I do think pampering is important. I do think positive emotions are important. I think if you can, what are you giving your customers to think about for the hour while they're on the massage table? If you can plant a seed that gets them thinking about either something that they're thankful for, something that they're hoping for, or somebody that they love, then you've just made that hour experience into something that's going to be much more than a physical, relaxing massage experience. They're now having this great moment of appreciation and mental well-being. And I think that's what we can really do on the hotel side, where we don't have all the programs and options available.
So I think that's great, because we kind of have an answer for how we deal with people at various spas. And that's what I think is so important, because all of it is so key to people's health and to helping our guests want to come back. Is there a quick question from the audience? We have a couple of minutes. Anybody? Question? Yes, please.
I would like to actually pursue the question of how the sugar affected the brain.
Can you talk about the sugar effect on the brain? Or you want more? Because I'm trying to repeat your question.
Well, I wondered if there'd been further research done to show that if you stabilize sugar levels, that you keep them under control.
If you stabilize sugar levels, do you keep a better control?
There hasn't been as much research on that as we would like. The paper showing the effect of the glucose came out about 4 years ago. So we move very slowly because the studies take a long time. So I don't know if someone's working on that, but it definitely feels like if people's blood sugar was stabilized, if people ate better. There is some evidence that prisons that adopt healthier diets have fewer incidences of problems with their prisoners. So I think that's some evidence that speaks to maybe changing people's diets might do that. Yeah.
One last question. You guys are overwhelming. You're overpowering. One last question. Going. Yes, please.
So, have you done anything with your staff or your employees, Jeremy, to try to implement some happiness programs? What advice can you share?
Thank you for the softball, Jim. Well, actually, I sat next to Deborah Seike at dinner last night, and she told me you have to talk about employee happiness because that's such an important part of the equation. So we did, Andrea Foster mentioned earlier things that we were doing with Westin Hotels. And one of the things that we're doing is we have it's called an associate engagement program. And so all of the wellness programs that we have for our guests, we're trying to introduce to the employees in some way as well. So if we have superfoods on the menu in the restaurant, it's also in the staff cafeteria, and we're educating the staff on that. So I needed to make sure that I mentioned that so Deborah doesn't get mad at me later. But the other thing that I would say is we are experimenting both on the shallow side of the pool and the deep side of the pool. So we're doing a lot with gratitude. So we have gratitude journals in the spa where guests can write, notes of appreciation or read the messages from other people. In another one of our spa concepts, we have what's called the glow board where people can leave notes of gratitude up on the board. We do a ritual in one of our spa concepts where we ask the guests to choose before the treatment something they're thankful for, something they're hoping for, or somebody they love, and to focus on that during their treatment. And then on the deep side of the pool, we're trying to help the guests focus on the meaning behind the visit. So we kind of take it for granted. There's another anniversary, another birthday party, somebody got engaged, somebody's on their honeymoon. But we want to really connect to that meaning with the guests. So we've been using note cards. This is actually an idea that I got from Ann McCall at Fairmont, where we use note cards and we allow the guests to either present note cards to each other, maybe if they're there for a couples massage, or a personalized note card from the staff to recognize the special event that they're there for, but really making sure that we help them to experience the meaning of their visit.
Okay, how about that? Let's give them a big round. Woo-hoo!